Whether you believe it or not, ancient beings have walked this world long before humanity. Over the years, they've been dismissed as mere characters in horror movies, but every legend carries a kernel of truth. Many of these creatures once existed, and some may still linger among us. Nestled deep within the snowy Alps, the small town of Schwarzwald was known for its charming Christmas traditions. Chief among them was the annual Krampus parade, a centuries-old festival where townsfolk donned elaborate costumes, complete with horns, fangs, and rattling chains, to scare away the darkness of winter and remind children to behave. It was a spectacle that drew tourists from far and wide, each eager to witness the fusion of merriment and menace. This year, however, the parade felt different. The air was heavier, the festive lights flickered ominously, and the costumed participants seemed more lifelike than ever. Among the crowd was Julia Vogel, a skeptical journalist from a big city newspaper. Sent to cover the tradition for a holiday feature, she had little patience for what she saw as outdated superstitions. "Just another quaint tradition," she muttered, adjusting her scarf against the biting wind as she watched the parade begin. The costumed Krampuses were as terrifying as they were impressive. Towering figures with glowing red eyes, sharpened claws, and massive horns stomped through the cobbled streets, their chains clanging ominously. The crowd cheered, though their enthusiasm felt strained, as if masking an undercurrent of unease. Julia noticed something else, a palpable tension rippling through the costume participants, whose movements seemed almost too natural. "Great craftsmanship," she remarked to a local woman standing nearby. The woman's expression tightened. "They're not all costumes." Julia laughed, assuming it was part of the town's spooky lore, but the woman's warning stayed with her. As the parade progressed, Julia's unease grew. The Krampuses were no longer performing for the crowd. They seemed to be hunting. Their glowing eyes scanned the throng as though searching for something, or someone. Then it happened. A young man near the edge of the crowd screamed as one of the Krampuses lunged at him. The figure dragged him into the shadows, its claws slicing through the night like a knife through silk. Julia gasped, but the crowd didn't react. They continued clapping and cheering, as if oblivious to what had just occurred. Grabbing her camera, Julia pushed through the crowd toward the spot where the man had disappeared. All she found was a single clawed footprint in the snow, steaming as though it had just been made. She snapped a photo before someone grabbed her arm. "Leave now," the old woman from earlier whispered fiercely. "Before it's too late." Julia shook her off. "What's going on here?" "Krampus has returned," the woman hissed. "Not the ones in costumes, the real one. He comes when the balance is broken, when the naughty outnumber the good. He's here to restore order." Julia wanted to dismiss her as delusional, but the screams echoing from another part of the parade route froze her blood. She turned and saw another Krampus dragging a struggling man into the dark alleyways. The parade seemed to devolve into chaos as more participants broke formation, their movements predatory and unrestrained. Terrified but determined, Julia followed the trail of the missing townsfolk deeper into the labyrinthine streets of Schwarzwald. She found herself at the edge of the woods, where the snow-covered trees loomed like silent sentinels. The clawed footprints led her to a clearing lit by an eerie, flickering red glow. There he stood, the real Krampus, towering over the snow, his twisted horns nearly brushing the treetops, his chains rattling with each step. In his clawed hand, he held a writhing burlap sack, muffled cries emanating from within. His glowing eyes locked onto Julia, freezing her in place. "You don't belong here," his deep, guttural voice growled, vibrating through her bones. "But perhaps you can atone." Julia's instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, though her voice wavered. "These are innocent people." Krampus tilted his head, a cruel smile curling his lips. "Innocent? Look closer, little skeptic." The sack split open, and Julia saw the faces of those who had disappeared, each one twisted with guilt and fear. She remembered their crimes, whispered about in the town's gossip. The thief who stole from the church, the man who cheated his neighbors, the woman who betrayed her family. None were truly innocent. "You judge them," Krampus said, stepping closer. "But what of you?" Julia stumbled back, her mind racing. She had always prided herself on being impartial, skeptical, above reproach. But deep down, she knew she wasn't blameless. She had written hit pieces that ruined lives, exploited people's pain for headlines, and ignored her own conscience for the sake of ambition. Krampus leaned down, his fanged face inches from hers. "Do you repent?" Tears streamed down Julia's face as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm sorry." The red glow faded, and when Julia opened her eyes, she was back in the town square, the parade once again festive and orderly. The costumed Krampuses danced and twirled, the crowd cheered, and the eerie incidents of the night seemed like a distant nightmare. But Julia knew the truth. As she packed her bags to leave Schwarzwald, she glanced at the photos on her camera. Every picture she had taken of the real Krampus was gone, replaced by static. Yet in the final photo, taken in the woods, a single set of glowing red eyes stared back at her from the darkness. The Krampus parade was over, for now. But Julia couldn't shake the feeling that one day he would return. "15-year-old Ryan had never been one to follow the rules. Detentions stacked up like trophies, his teachers constantly calling home about his pranks and defiance. At home, he was no better. His parents were at their wits' end after finding the shattered vase he'd blamed on the dog, the cash missing from his dad's wallet, and his sister's broken tablet mysteriously appearing in his room. For Ryan, it was all part of the fun. But on Christmas Eve, everything changed. While rummaging through the attic in search of hidden gifts, Ryan stumbled upon an old, weathered trunk. It was unlike anything he'd seen before, its surface carved with strange, intricate patterns. Inside, beneath layers of dust, he found a thick, leather-bound book. On the cover, written in faded gold lettering, were the words, "The Naughty List." Ryan smirked. Seriously? They went all out with the Christmas junk. Curious, he flipped it open. The yellowed pages were filled with names, written in an elegant looping script. Beside each name was a date. As he skimmed the entries, he noticed something unsettling. Every date was followed by the word "missing." "Yeah, okay," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "Nice try, Mom." He assumed it was part of an elaborate ploy to scare him into behaving, but as he flipped through the pages, his heart sank. Near the back of the book, where the ink appeared fresher, he saw a name he recognized, Ryan Cole. Next to it was today's date. His smirk faded. He slammed the book shut and tossed it back into the trunk, trying to shake off the chill creeping down his spine. It was just a coincidence, he told himself. Probably something his parents set up to freak him out. They were always lecturing him about consequences. That night, as snow blanketed the quiet neighborhood, Ryan lay in bed scrolling through his phone, trying to forget the unsettling discovery. But the silence felt heavier than usual, the shadows in his room darker. Then he heard it, a deep, guttural scraping noise, like claws dragging across wood. His breath hitched. "It's just the wind," he whispered, pulling the blanket over his head. The sound came again, this time from outside his window. Summoning his courage, Ryan peeked out from under the covers. What he saw made his blood run cold. A massive figure stood in the snow, silhouetted by the glow of the street lamp. It was impossibly tall, with twisted horns that seemed to scrape the sky. Its eyes burned like embers, and it clutched a long chain that clattered with every movement. Draped over its back was a large, writhing sack. Ryan blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light. But the creature's gaze snapped to his window, locking onto him with a predatory grin. Panicking, Ryan leapt out of bed and bolted for the door, but as he reached for the handle, the room plunged into darkness. The air grew thick, and the scent of burning coal filled his nostrils. When he turned around, the creature was inside, towering over him. "Ryan Cole," it rumbled, its voice like the grinding of stones. "You've been very naughty." Ryan stumbled back, his knees giving out. This isn't real," he stammered. "You're not real." Krampus leaned closer, its breath scorching the air. "Your lies, your theft, your cruelty, they've brought me here. You must atone or face my punishment." Ryan's heart pounded as the creature reached for him with gnarled claws. "Wait!" he shouted. "What do you want me to do?" Krampus paused, tilting its head. "Prove you can change. Right the wrongs you've done by dawn, or join the others on the naughty list." With a snap of its fingers, the room returned to normal, but the book lay open on his desk, the list glowing faintly. Ryan hesitated only a moment before grabbing it and sprinting out of the house. The snow fell harder as Ryan made his way through the neighborhood, shivering in his pajamas. He returned the stolen money to Mr. Jenkins, his elderly neighbor. He apologized to his sister, slipping her tablet back under her door. He even left an anonymous note confessing to his teacher about cheating on last week's test. Each time, the burning weight in his chest eased slightly, but the night wore on, and dawn crept closer. As he trudged back home, exhausted but relieved, he spotted Krampus waiting for him at the edge of the yard. The creature's glowing eyes appraised him silently before it nodded once and vanished into the swirling snow. The next morning, Ryan awoke to the sound of his family laughing downstairs. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. When he went to the attic to check the trunk, it was gone, as if it had never existed. But on his desk lay a single note written in looping script. "Goodness is a choice. Choose wisely." Ryan never forgot that Christmas. From then on, he made sure to stay off the naughty list. The St. Agnes Orphanage sat atop a lonely hill, its silhouette stark against the snow-covered Bavarian countryside. The year was 1892, and the long, bitter nights of December wrapped the orphanage in an icy shroud. For the children who lived there, Christmas was the only time of year they felt a sliver of joy. Except this year, Christmas brought terror. It started innocently enough, with whispers of the Krampus legend shared among the children late at night. They huddled under blankets in the dim glow of a single candle, spinning tales of the beast that punished naughty children during Christmas time. The older ones added dramatic embellishments, delighting in the younger kids' wide-eyed fear. "Krampus has claws as long as knives," whispered Hans, the oldest. "And his sack isn't for gifts, it's for carrying away children who misbehave." "But it's just a story, right?" asked Greta, clutching her ragged doll tightly. Hans smirked. "Do you want to find out?" The laughter that followed echoed hollowly in the cold dormitory. That was the last night anyone saw Hans. The next morning, his bed was empty, the blankets tossed aside as though he'd left in a hurry. The matron, stern and dismissive, assumed he had run away. "He was always trouble," she muttered, her tone devoid of concern. "Let that be a lesson to the rest of you." But the children knew better. Hans wasn't the kind to run. They noticed the scratches near the window by his bed, marks that hadn't been there before. They swore they heard scratching sounds on the roof the night before. Then another child vanished. Little Klaus, who always sneaked extra biscuits from the kitchen. His disappearance brought whispers of Krampus back into the orphanage, and soon none of the children slept soundly. At night, they would hear faint growls in the hallways and see fleeting shadows under the crack of the door. Greta was determined not to end up like Hans or Klaus. She was clever and cautious, but most of all, she was kind-hearted. That night, as the storm raged outside and the wind howled through the eaves, she stayed awake, clutching her doll tightly, determined to find the truth. It was around midnight when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. They didn't belong to the matron, nor to the housekeeper. These steps were slow, deliberate, and far heavier than any humans. Summoning all her courage, Greta crept from her bed, careful not to wake the others. The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint moonlight filtering through frost-covered windows. Greta followed the sound of the footsteps, which seemed to be coming from the stairwell leading to the attic. When she reached the attic door, it creaked open as if inviting her in. She hesitated, her breath visible in the freezing air. She stepped inside. The attic was cluttered with forgotten relics of the orphanage's past. Broken toys, old furniture, trunks filled with moth-eaten clothes. But in the center of the room stood a figure, tall, hunched, and covered in dark fur. Its horns curved like a ram's, and its eyes glowed a fiery red. Its clawed hand clutched a large, writhing sack. "Krampus," Greta whispered, her voice trembling. The beast turned its head slowly, its eyes locking onto hers. It snarled, baring yellowed, jagged teeth, but Greta did not run. "Why are you taking us?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. The creature paused, tilting its head as though considering her question. Finally, it spoke in a guttural, raspy voice. "Punishment. For the sins of the matron." Greta blinked in confusion. The matron? What did she do? Krampus gestured to the sack, which began to glow faintly. Images appeared in the air above it, like a phantom projection. Greta saw visions of the matron locking children in the basement, depriving them of food, and striking them with a cane. The cruelty was endless. "She is the guilty one," Krampus growled, "yet it is the children who bear her pain." Greta's heart ached for her friends. "Then punish her, not us," she pleaded. "We're innocent." Krampus's eyes narrowed. "Innocence does not erase mischief, but your bravery, it is rare." The creature dropped the sack, and the ghostly images vanished. "Save them," it said before stepping back into the shadows, "before it is too late." When Greta returned to the dormitory, the sack was there, lying in the middle of the floor. Inside, she found Hans, Klaus, and the others, shaken but alive. She worked quickly to free them, and they all vowed to confront the matron together. The next morning, they exposed her cruel deeds to the townsfolk, who removed her from the orphanage. That Christmas, for the first time, the children felt safe. But Greta never forgot Krampus's parting words. As the years passed and she grew older, she would sometimes hear scratching on the roof and wonder if the beast was still watching, waiting for the next sin to punish.